Buenas tardes a todos los asistentes. Muy bienvenidos a Casa Árabe.
Be very welcome to Casa Árabe today on the 12th of October. And we have the pleasure to have three journalists and activists here with us today. They will be speaking about two different dimensions that usually are treated separately. And the fact that today we do have two books that are being presented today, the books about Estado Islámico, the Islamic State, and que queda de las revueltas árabes, what's left of the Arab uprisings. They discuss the meteoric rise and of the Islamic State, one of them, and the other one discusses the Arab Uprisings. It's in January next. It will be already 5 years since they took place. And I think that we can actually say that they are two sides of the same coin. They're closely related. In Javier Martín's book, on page 16, it says that once the hopes of creating a different world have been crushed and having integration as a utopia, the only values left is the rebellion using the armed rebellion with guns. So this is what is left, actually, of the Arab uprisings, with the exception of Tunisia. Javier has also been to Tunisia recently, will be able to shed some light on the subject. And we believe that it was really commendable that the Quartet for National Dialogue in Tunisia has received a Nobel Peace Prize. And this once again puts the success story on the headlines. So from Bahrain, we have here Reem Khalifa, which is an activist, which is the founder of the newspaper Wasat from Bahrain. We also have Javier Martín, the author of Islamic State, Geopolitics of Chaos, and David Perejil. He's also a journalist and an editor of what's left of the Arab Uprisings. He didn't have to come from so far away, but he's also very much involved in these issues. I'll be more or less controlling the time allocated to each speaker. They have 15 minutes each, and after that we will have a Q&A, and you will have the chance to ask our experts anything you wish. You can also tweet, take pictures, and well, hopefully this will be a very productive dialogue. So, David, you have the floor first. So, good evening, and thank you all for coming and for being interested in this subject. And thanks to Karim as well for taking care of all the arrangements. It's never easy to take two people, to bring two people from so far away. And, well, playing a bit with the titles of these books, texts are always, twisted and turned around to make them say something. My book is first has an introduction about the why, the reasons why, and the idea was to try and mix up activists and uprisings, because at the beginning there was the much talk about the Islamic fall or the Islamic autumn, and I think it was a label that was quite misleading, such as the Arab uprising, the Arab Spring was also misleading. As Karim said, I think that almost 5 years later, it is essential to have a book such as this one, not because of the the memories, but it could also be the time, a book about the time of Nasser's time or the Islamic Brotherhood's time. But we think that this part of history is quite exceptional because there are many things left unsaid and many things left undone. Demands, bread and social justice and equality, democracy, the dignity of the individual. We have to remind us of all that. Nobody deserves to live under its dictatorship, and nobody we don't want anybody to be robbed and deprived of their dignity. Maybe in the 40s, the 50s, the situation was the same in the Latin American countries, and now we are seeing this here. And this was the approach. In 2011, there was an excess of information. We thought that Facebook and Twitter were everything. But now, after time has elapsed, we can see that in 700 words, you cannot actually say everything. You need a longer period of time, and you need documenting things. In fact, we needed opinions. We were told that it was a bit too early to do a book on the Arab Uprisings. I think that it is time. It's been long enough. We need to document many things. Otherwise, sandstorms will blow away everything. Such as the one we had in Amman last summer. So for all those activists on the ground, for all those people who have been tortured and who are suffering, well, I think they deserve a book. Otherwise, they're doubly buried. They're buried in their own countries, and they're buried by the international community, and they are buried by the press because of the silence about them. So the book opens with the prologue by Javier Martín. We thought it was the ideal person to do that because he knows the region very well, and he has a lot of information about it. I think that journalistic books are essential because they bring us closer to reality and allow journalists to give us some key elements of information. Then Naomi Ramirez, in chapter 1, there's an interview with Salameh Kaile and Elias Khoury because we didn't know the protagonists of these stories in our countries. I think from the activists' point of view, the idea is to create relationships on an equal footing. I think that for people covering this information, this is absolutely necessary.
No solo porque están allí,
not only because they are there and they know what's going on, but because they bring new visions, new sides to the table that sometimes are not known to all of us. As journalists, as activists, one of the things we've learned in Palestine is the problems and the joys of coordinating with 4 or 5 different groups from all different walks of life. It is a very enriching experience. Many barriers come down, and with regard to these other, with the idea we have of the Islamic world. And the program, it not only get to know the program of the Islamic State and the idea that we are 2 different worlds, 2 opposite worlds, and there's nothing in between. But the real thing is that the reality is that everything is in between, and this is what we have to know. Then the chapter about Syria was the most difficult to do because the situation has been constantly evolving, and but Syria is at the core of the book. Then we have the Reem's chapter about Bahrain, and it was a key chapter as well because it differentiated many aspects in the region. One of the things left from the Arab Uprisings are the changes on the ground. There's been lots of changes. We don't have glass ball to see what will come next and where the process will lead us. We don't know about that, but we know that there are lots of changes. There's lots of politics changing, and there's not only the superpowers return to the region, such as the US or Russia, but the sort of regional Cold War that is taking place, where Saudi Arabia's role is very scarcely known. And there's also the echoes of recent and not so recent events, from the last 30 or so years. I interviewed then two priests, one from Palestine, one from Jordan, and they told us that it was very difficult to fight against these 30 Saudi Arabian channels that are very fundamentalist oriented, and they have, they have the greatest outreach in the region. It is so But if this no-go area can be reduced, if new messages can be launched, that could be tackled. Otherwise, the consequences are very, are very much of concern, not only for the region but for everybody else. The consequences will reach us all. Many people think that this book is quite timely because of the refugees, from the Syrian refugees, the Kurd refugees. Sorry, I get, I'm speaking too fast because I'm really thrilled about this. Okay, the recent situation in Libya with the peace agreement, it might sound very nice, but there are many different elements to consider. First and foremost, it has not been decided by the people on the spot. The idea is try to tell about the process, not to bury the role that activists played, because we don't have to think only in terms of the Islamic State, dictatorship. These are the ghosts that are there. They never left. They have always been there, but activists have always been there. The mining strikes, the activists in Egypt have always been there. We know that. We know how hard it is for things to take the proper places, the thousands of campaigns that you launch and don't succeed, maybe it's not because they're not good, but because they were not there at the right moment, at the right place. One of the harshest truths that activists learn is that without a strategy, you cannot actually go very far.
Bueno, quería también contaros un poco.
I wanted also to tell you about, very briefly, touch upon some aspects. You can ask us about it later if you are interested. Tunisia first. Tunisia just received, has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, as you know, and this points at something that can be both good and bad. It's a good thing that one process has been really awarded here, because they have received a prize, and this is, as an example to be followed. But it doesn't say anything about the reasons why those uprisings took place. They have not been solved yet. No governments from any sides have been able to tackle the issue, and they haven't done it because they have very harsh economic policies, and it doesn't mention anything about this social alarm they have created with the Islamist policies or anti-Islamist policies. And the idea would be to give them further support for them to be able to tackle those issues, those very deep running issues. Otherwise, the situation is far too fragile, and the neighbors are too volatile. Hopefully this prize will not be shelved somewhere or shown as just as a prize, but it will be the the opening step, the first step in a true process of change. Then Lilia Waslati, I think I really recommend you to follow her and treat her. If we don't give the opportunity to have a legal defense for each terrorist, this is a real injustice, a sheer injustice. NGOs have been accused, been blamed as traitors because of the time, of complaining about the time someone can remain without a lawyer. But other practices, the only thing they do is to perpetuate the dictatorships that were there before. So on our reactions, we have in our hands the way we react will shape the way the process will take. So we have to be very mindful about that. Then Turkey, we have included it because it was the most important non-Arab country in the region. We would have liked to have a chapter about Iran, but we didn't have room for that, unfortunately. We wanted to include Palestine because of everything that's going on. Israel has made the most of the geopolitical turbulence there to increase their power in the region. But we wanted to highlight that there is a Palestinian society that we know very little because it's been 8 years since they were able to vote for the last time. Activists have been trying to break that silence, to help them speak their minds outside the political arena. There has been a mini intifada, worse than the one last year. And so it is unthinkable not to consider all the options on the table. The chapter has been written by an activist. He's on and off jail all the time because he's and he mentioned what are the causes of the problems in Jerusalem, what are the problems in the different areas in the city. And David, he insisted that with the Oslo agreements, you cannot really do very much. That's something that also was indicated by the uprisings. You cannot do much because of the strength of your adversaries. I remember that there have been always demonstrations in different cities and for many years, and now they are in the hands, for instance, in Iraq, in the hands of the Islamic State. Jihadism, local dictatorships, and international military interventions are the three major coasts that are present in the region. Everything is quite interconnected. And David Kokti, he is an activist that I also recommend you to follow him. In his blog, he posted many things about the Syrian War, and that was very courageous from his part because in Palestine they had to be also come to grips what was happening somewhere else in the region. I published this in a story I covered in Beirut about the refugees. If refugees are people just like us, and if they force us not to have an opinion, then we are no longer people. So we are guests everywhere we go, and if we raise our voices, then they kick us out. In 2012, it was said that the uprising was supposed to be a peaceful one against dictatorship, against the lack of freedom, and that should be also remembered. things are changing in the region, and this is what that's the main message we want to convey with this book. And it's important to be familiar with the geopolitics in the region. But let's not forget about the people. And people have to know about other people without dreams, without wishes. Why no society can ever be built? Why should Arabs be forced to live under those conditions? Maybe if you have friends in the region, you're thinking about them. Nobody deserves being living under those conditions. This is not just nice words. This is just an encouragement for you to think about those people. There is one chapter from a Jordan journalist who still lives in Aleppo. She came to Malaga for a while but she went back to Aleppo very bravely to live there and to tell us the story. So the Arab uprisings are not dead, very far from that, and we want to convey those messages from those activists. They are the best in their societies, and they are the hope for change in their societies. Thank you.
Gracias a David Perejil por hacernos esta síntesis de este.
Well, thank you very much for your speech on this book. You can buy this book and also the one by Javier Martín. I want to remind you that this area and these uprisings reflect not only geopolitical changes, but also international powers intervening in the region. They have been intervening in the past. They are doing so right now. And this has to do with what happened yesterday, last year, and the last century in Casa Árabe. We've made several analyses and efforts to try and see the consequences of the First World War. And on this particular region, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and also several decisions that were taken and that have shaped the picture nowadays, the problems and the situation in the region. And David has also reminded us of the human dimension of these conflicts. We are not talking about abstract things here. We're talking about people. We're talking about great humanitarian crisis. I will give the floor now to Reem Khalifa. She comes from Bahrain, and for us it's a pleasure to have her here today, because it's a pleasure always to be able to hear someone from the region. As David was saying before, Bahrain is one of the countries that sometimes we forget about because we don't talk about them so much, and I think it's a key factor to understand also the role played by Saudi Arabia and the growing tension between Shiites and Sunnis in the region. And also it's important to see that sometimes the West turns a blind eye to these conflicts. We could talk about these spring uprisings. Well, it's a term to summarize this uprising in Bahrain. So I give you the floor, Reem. Reem will speak English, so you can use the headphones for the translation.
First of all, I just want to correct something, that I am one of the editorial founders in Al-Wasat, so I did not found Al-Wasat. Yeah, and secondly, I insist I'm journalist, I'm not activist. So today I am here to talk about Bahrain as a journalist, since I witness the dramatic changes in my country, Bahrain. And this is all started sudden after what happened in Tunisia. So it's it was something different what happened in Bahrain. And to start my talk about Bahrain, first of all, I have to say it is not a sectarian movement. It is not a tension between Sunni and Shia. It is purely a civil rights movement, and it did not born with 2011 events. The struggle for human rights, for democracy, civil rights meant a big thing for all groups of Bahrainis. And Bahrain, it's not like other Arab countries, meaning it's an island. It's the only Arab country which is island located in the middle of the Gulf. And the diversity of this island made it so different and so special. So that's why we have Islam, we have Hinduism, we have Christians, we have Jews, Baha'is, all kind of people living in this land of Bahrain. Going back to the dramatic changes that happened in 2011, as a journalist, I see this was a big shift in my country, especially that the young people wanted something different. Different because we witness also a different kind of revolution, which is the social media revolution. Young people seeing other young people in different parts of the world exercising the right to express themselves in a free way. Meaning, every Bahraini in my country wants to be like a free bird, if I can say that. And since this dream is too far to be implemented or applied, it was something that many of them, when they saw what happened in Tunisia, and then later on in Egypt, Bahrain was the third. It was not Libya or Syria. But because it's so small, nobody really focused on Bahrain. And because Bahrain, in the middle between giant countries in the region, and there is conflict of interest, so Bahrain is left out and labeled by different names. I have to say, when the youth grouped and marched towards Pearl Square, why Pearl? Bahrain was well known with the industry of natural pearl, and this is something that Bahrain was distinguished with it through history. So since we did not have a space, so the roundabout was the space for the Bahrainis to go. What happened took everybody by surprise. And when victims started to fall, our crown prince of Bahrain intervened and took a charge of the country for less than a month. During that hectic period, negotiations between the crown prince and the opposition was developing positively. But the events accelerated and the negotiations collapsed. It was so fast. And we entered another phase in my country. And then we had emergency law implemented and intervention to stop what's going on in this big space, which the young people named it Pearl Square. And the international media named it Pearl Revolution or Uprising. It was unusual to see this happening in the Gulf region. But it is not really unusual for Bahrainis, since the struggle goes back to 1920s, starting with the pearl divers before the discovery of oil in Bahrain in 1932. Trade unions is one of, phenomena and the things that we have in our society is the oldest in the Gulf region. In Tunisia, it is the oldest among the Arab world, Ittihad al-Shughal. They played a role, but the people paid for it. When there was announcement in that time, like a civil strike, made everybody to pay for it because most of people of Bahrain were dismissed. It is not about Shia and Sunni. It is about people want to exercise their rights, as well as a journalist, as an independent journalist, I would like to exercise my reporting in a free environment. It is a great to see my audience here in Madrid listening about Bahrain. And I know many Spanish people, they don't know about Bahrain or Bahrain, like the way how you pronounce it. And, or maybe they don't really know much about the Gulf region. Maybe they see a stereotype about this region. It is not about money or oil. Sometimes we feel oil is a curse in our nations, in that part of the world. It is about dignity, pride. The young people wanted something different. They are not different from the other young people in Tunis who were fed up from applying old policies on them, which was maybe okay 40 years ago, but they are looking forward for something different. I have to say, in 2011, after what happened in Pearl Square and the crackdown took over, and then the security emergency law was implemented, for the next 2.5 months until 1st of June 2011, lots of things happened in the island. And one of our members of the founders of Al-Wasat newspaper, Mr. Karim Hauser, was killed in custody. And that was documented in the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry, BIKI report, well known for that. And it was set up under the chairmanship of the Professor Sharif Bassiouni. The BIKI report investigated what happened in Bahrain between February and June, and it was welcomed by the government of Bahrain. And this report is available, and you can have a look at it for anyone who would like to know what happened in Bahrain and explaining the views through the international expertise. The report contained 28 recommendations and aimed to rectifying critical issues related to human rights abuses that took over in this particular period, and propose a roadmap of political reforms. Well, they want me to. Anyway, I won't go really in details. I have to say that Bahrain is part of the change of the Arab world. And unfortunately, the peaceful opposition in Bahrain and the Crown Prince, they always wanted to find a path, but never given the chance, because the opposition looking for something like constitutional monarchy, and the Crown Prince looking for something to please all parties in Bahrain. But at the end, we see the changes that happening in the region. We see the refugees in Syria. We see what's happening in Iraq, ISIS, the war in Yemen. So everybody is busy. But I like to finalize my talk is Bahrain is not far away from this change. And if the Europeans right now is annoyed with these massive number coming from Syria, it could be not really far from other countries. I think what we need in the Arab world is a fair justice that apply human rights, democracy, pluralism in media, and people could access to environment that they can express their views in a freely way. Otherwise, the problem will always continue if Europe will be supporting what is happening right now. So I think Bahrain is not the only example, but could be influential example in our region. And if you have more questions later, I will just answer because I need to end up my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, shukran Reem. Muchas gracias por respetar el tiempo y bueno, por también justamente rectificar y explicar que el conflicto de Bahrein, aunque se ha querido
explaining the conflict in Bahrain, even though in the media they try to reduce that to a sectarian conflict, we know that it is much more than that. And at the beginning, there was no sectarian tension in your country, and I think that in the media sometimes we simplify the complexity of societies in the Arab world, and we try to explain everything by talking about this tension between Sunnis and Shiites, and there are also Christians in the region, and in some countries they are struggling a lot, especially in Iraq. We will now give the floor to Javier Martín. He will talk about his book, Estado Islámico, Islamic State. It's the third edition of the book. So this means that it's a successful book because it was published this year. So it's been a successful book. Javier has also been in Jerusalem, Tehran, and El Cairo, where we met. And he's a journalist that has a very good view on the different countries of the region. And I would like to ask Javier to talk more or less like Reem and not like David, especially for the interpreters. Thank you. Thanks.
Bueno, muchas gracias por la asistencia. La verdad es que es complicado hablar.
Very much. It's complicated to talk after Reem because she is such a powerful voice, and she comes from the origin, from the region, and she's been able to explain what's happening. I would like to thank Casa Árabe for giving us the opportunity to present these two books, and I would like to thank Catarata because they agreed to publish our books, and they dared to do so even though they are complicated books. So I'm really grateful to them as well. And I'm also very grateful to David because he asked me to prepare the prologue of his book. So I accepted the challenge for two reasons mainly. I didn't come here to talk about my book, but to talk about David's book. Because my book was published in April, it's working really well. We have a new edition with a new chapter talking about the north of Africa. Why did I accept David's challenge? Well, first, because I'm a journalist, and David is talking about this type of journalism which is very needed nowadays. We need to have time to reflect on those issues, because nowadays we don't talk about these things in the media, in the newspapers, and that is why we make the mistakes we make, and we hear so many errors and mistakes when we hear people talking about this. Unfortunately, we are only able to talk about these issues with this type of books. So that is why I accepted the challenge. And I also accepted the challenge because I wanted to reflect on these issues. The prologue has been changed in the meantime because I handed it to David and then I asked him to let me change it. Why? Because when I reread the text, I saw that I was talking about change a lot. We've been hearing since 2011 that this is a change, this is an uprising, a revolution. We've been using these terms for so long, but what do they mean? Are we talking about a change? Are we talking about historic momentum here? What's behind this term, the term change, that we use so often in this type of articles? To me, this is quite clear. We are witness to the end of the 20th century. We are not aware of that, but we are seeing the end of this Middle East that we knew in the 20th century. In a few years, when my children go to university, if they want to attend university, this region will have different borders, different governments, different regimes, and I hope that they will have different relationships with the West. And we need to bear in mind that this change means an end and a beginning. We are witnessing, luckily we are witnessing, or we have the opportunity to see the end of the Middle East that was built at the beginning of the 20th century with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, with the Lebanon created by France, Palestine created by Great Britain, the borders that were drawn at the time. So we are witnessing the end of that era, and we need to be aware of that, because we must take into account that we are applying all solutions. We saw that these solutions were applied in the 20th century and they created more conflicts, and we are trying to apply all solutions to a completely new problem. We didn't understand, or we didn't want to understand, as Reem said before, that we are not talking about sectarian conflicts here. We're talking about rights. We're talking about freedom. We're talking about people being fed up. Yesterday, someone asked me about Iraq, and I don't like to talk about my personal experiences, but yesterday I told this person, because this person was asking, why do we have this situation now in the region? And I told him I was born in 1972. After, well, I lived in Spain for 22 years, and the rest of my life I've been living in the Arab world, in different countries. I've been witness to several wars, and during those wars I met different people, and I met the Agencia Efe journalist in Iraq. He had to leave his country. He's a refugee now. We used to talk a lot at the time. And he told me, listen, Javier, we were born more or less at the same time. We are more or less the same age. But I'm 44 and I've only lived for 8 years in peace, because in Iraq we only had, in the meantime, 8 years in peace. In 1989, there was the end of the war in Iraq, but there was no peace. Then there was an invasion by the US embargo, the exclusion of the airspace, another invasion, the no-fly zone, the extremisms, jihad. So he only lived in peace for 8 years. He only had rights for 8 years. His children did not see peace or human rights. And I don't know why people wonder why there's been an uprising, why people ask for social justice in those countries. We've tried to react to these uprisings with old solutions, trying to impose solutions in Libya because the West has many interests in Libya, and we have imposed a government there, and we've chosen the candidates for the people, and that is going to make this conflict even worse. We didn't understand what happened in Iraq. We didn't understand that by destroying the regime there, by dismantling the army, and by making one group against the other two, was going to generate a frustration wave that could create a social movement or a jihad movement, as we saw. We didn't understand what's going on in Syria. We didn't understand what's going on in the Gulf or in Yemen, because we are applying the same solutions that we were applying in the 20th century, and this century is gone. We did not want to hear the voice of brave people that cannot talk in their countries. This book is written by many Spaniards, but what we have is the voices of people living in the region, and they cannot speak with their own names, because if they do so, they will go to jail. We haven't been able to understand that the energy policy change in the world is going to change the relation with the countries in the region, and we didn't understand that we couldn't have for 30 years a country with 80 million people completely isolated, such as, a country such as Iran, with so many links with the different countries in the region, that we could not have enemies and friends and mix them up when both countries, one was a friend, the other one was an enemy, were violating human rights equally. We have been witnessing an unbalanced Middle East for many years. We are talking about human rights violations in Iran, but we don't talk about these same human rights violations in Saudi Arabia, for instance. We protest about, the situation of women in Iran, but we don't say that in Saudi Arabia women cannot drive, for instance, because we've been living in a situation where it was good to have an ally with a clampdown on its population. Same thing happened in Egypt, When the dictator went away, we were afraid and we put another one. We didn't understand that jihad is a tool used by many regimes to send an idea and to tell us that only we are able to maintain stability in the region, and that is not true. Sometimes we talk about terrorism or jihadism to justify unjustifiable policies, such as in Israel. We have the possibility to change all that. We have the possibility to have a fairer Middle East and to have a fairer relationship with the Middle East. And that's the only way forward. That's the only way to look for solutions such as for problems such as the refugees crisis, because they are not running away from war. The refugees coming to Europe this summer were not fleeing from war. They already, they already did that in 2013. They ran away from Bashar al-Assad in 2011. They were living in refugees camps, but they cannot live there for 4 years without a fate, without a future. Obviously, if they see that the war is going on in the country and that no one is interested in looking for a solution to the war, and that they have to live in a refugee camp such as their Palestinian counterparts for 50 years, then they run away. But they don't run away from war, they run away from misery, from the lack of freedom, from the lack of rights. We need to understand that if we want to have a solution for the conflicts in the Middle East, we need to change the old policy, because that has hurt so much the region. With this type of policies, we've killed so many people there. We have businesses with these dictators. Can you understand that a country with 28 million people is the fourth weapons buyer in the world? The country that spends more in weapons is the US, then Russia and China, and then Saudi Arabia. They buy millions of weapons to US companies, from US companies and from French companies. El País says today that France, in order to maintain their status in the Middle East, has sold millions of weapons to Saudi Arabia. There's another newspaper that says that there is a fight between the foreign affairs minister and another minister in the Cameron government, because there's a British citizen that has been condemned to sentenced to flogging, and we are helping those countries. The Foreign Affairs Minister says, no, we cannot do anything because we cannot damage our relations with Saudi Arabia for, these human rights issues. That is the problem, and that's the opportunity that we have nowadays, because we are living a historical moment that we need to seize the opportunity.
Muchas gracias, Javier Martín, por
Thank you, Javier Martín, for speaking so candidly about all these issues. For many people, this sounds like a cliche. It's not a change, it's just it's a paradigm shift, it's a sign of the time. And there's fractures in the region are happening without anybody changing the old formulas, formulas that were adapted to the realities in the 20th centuries, when the parameters of these relationships were decided and
yo creo
designed.
muchas lagunas también en
So many
cuanto a,
gaps, I believe.
Es cierto que el Estado de Derecho es el que
In many other areas, the rule of law should be
la manifestación de todos estos pueblos en estas revueltas que ha
the
dado voz
ideal. It is the ideal in many of these uprisings and demonstrations in these countries. It has given rise to budding civil society in many of those. In Libya, you don't have any institutions, so it is difficult to build something from scratch. But it is one of the major challenges, and this is one of the main areas where the West could do something and could transfer the know-how on institution building, transparency, etc. And now I'd like to give the floor to the audience, to this distinguished audience. A very crowded room tonight. Thank you. I think this is a subject, a topic that really is very interesting for many of us to see what goes beneath the water. You know, we only see the tip of the iceberg, and people want to see the rest of it below the surface. It is quite difficult to understand things and to understand the different stakeholders involved and who is playing against who and with who. But these books really help us to navigate these waters.